Hello, everybody. I would like to thank you to be watching this presentation. I'd like to thank the organization of the Congress of Parasitology of Brazil. And then I will start my talk straight away. Okay, I give this provocative title, The Emergence of Infectious Diseases in one hand, geographic expansion of insect vectors of disease on the other hand, minimizing health risks in an uncertain world, to try to bring about a discussion a little bit deeper in terms of what is ecology of human diseases are telling us on the impact we cause in the planet, and where exactly are the risks for us to get more diseases or not diseases, to get a larger expansion and coexistence of the usual disease we have to face today because of changes we cause in the planet. The center of our discussion is climate. The global warming is going to be a driver for expansion of territories of many diseases because it's going to facilitate the expansion of territory of some of these insects capable to transmit this disease to us. But also it can help us to have a little bit more of problems with other new emergent diseases. Is a point that we need to discuss today because of the situation the world are living. So the first thing I want to discuss is this impression, this actually belief that where we are going to get our diseases are the wet tropical places in this planet. So why do we think wild tropical places could make us ill? In fact, we have a straight relation between diversity of birds and mammals and diversity of human pathogens. This dam is showing here is human pathogens, but that's because species diversity, species richness is directly related to latitude and humidity. The most wet and equatorial is the place, more species will be there. And that's for everything. That's going to be for parasites, for infectious diseases, pathogens. It's going to be for birds, mammals, insects, everything. We should, Dam and his group are showing here birds and mammals richness and human pathogen richness because it's with birds and mammals that we share most of those species of parasites that are going to be capable to spill over towards humanity or all domestic animals. But if you sit down here, you actually are seeing that this line is spread towards the X this X-axis, because we're going to have actions made by countries changing what is going to be the effect of pathogen richness and pathogen prevalence. So the fact that we have more pathogens in tropical wet places not necessarily means that we have to get more diseases among us inside our communities. We can act on those and change this situation and prevent this disease to spread towards our society. But then still, this does not respond to the question why we think we have this feeling, we have this unconscious perception of wild tropical, mainly those wet tropical forests could be a place that make us heal. Eventually, it's because it's not a place to live. This is a very interesting paper made by Talavara, and they showed that if you have a look on how we perceive disease in our existence, or you have to search these archaeologically, or you have to search these anthropologically. So they did anthropologically and follow several hunter-gatherer human populations and try to understand how those population size of humans in primitive conditions respond to net primary productivity, the amount of resources our ecosystem can produce, and how we convert that in human population. So this is the graph, the figure above, where you see the population density and productivity of the ecosystem being a positive relation. You actually have more people in response of the productivity of that place. If you are living as hunting and gatherer, you're going to have little people in deserts, a lot of them in Mediterranean subtropical forest. But then if you go further this threshold, when you're going to have more productivity, like in very tropical, wet environments, the capability of humans to produce larger populations is going to be prevented. We cannot produce more individuals. We cannot be a larger population inside a very wet tropical forest or very productive environment unless we change that environment, unless you made it what fit us better, which is the deforestation, the transformation we cause in nature for accommodate our civilization, let's sort of speak. But one thing else happened after this threshold is that this is pathogenic stress, the size of those blue balls, is going to be harder. So we're going to have more pathogenic stress on those populations when, after a certain point, we just cannot have more people, but you're going to have more disease for those places there. If you look at this graph, which is a mirror, you see the stress caused for pathogen is not bigger in a very productive place or in a desert. You actually have little pathogenic stress, and pathogenic stress is going to increase after a certain productivity of the ecosystem. So if you have more resources, if you have more diversity, if you have more humidity, you're going to have more organisms capable to invade your body, to use you as a host, to occupy you as a resource, and then you're going to have more stress caused for pathogens and less advantage to be in that place. So extremely high productive ecosystem is not our home. But if you change those places to maiden home for us, are we actually making our home even worse than this tropical forest? Eventually, yes. What we need to keep in mind is that we actually need to have those tropical, very wet and diverse ecosystem preserved, and we need to be out of that. What you have to understand is the highest diversity possible is not exactly, and that's going to be a highest possible diversity of hosts, vertebrate hosts, and also of pathogens, but those are not actually being the source or the drivers of spillover towards humanity. Actually, a little few than the whole diversity, few species with past capability and good adjustment to our populations are those that actually are able to produce those specific pathogens adaptable to us, capable to spill over to humans or all domestic animals. Those are the problem. Therefore, we're going to have more risks to have emergent diseases by giving environment, giving habitat and better conditions for those species that can increase their populations in association to us, and then increase the load of pathogens capable to invade us, more than by having a highly diverse ecosystem close to us. If you have too many species, that does not mean you're going to have too many emergent diseases toward us. This is not coming from everywhere or everyone in a tropical forest. These are coming for some particular species. And if you provide to those particular species conditions to have a larger population, there is where we're going to have the risks increase to us. And those species in here that can produce a larger population while existing with us are the species that are facilitated in our environments, our modified landscapes, our urbanized and polluted and disturbed ecosystem can favor those species and then can carry the disease that can contaminate us. And all this coming from Kinsey and Osfeld's fantastic work. They show the spillover paradigm is just changing because you cannot pick up one culprit from the nature and say, this is the species that spill over toward us. This is not exactly what happened, but you have a set of possible hosts that can share parasites among them and pathogens among them. And those are going to be like the laboratory where one of those species can then jump towards some little simple man in the bushes trying to find his survivorship. But the point is, the disease is jumping to us because of these little men producing food or farming close to the forest and natural places, or this is not exactly the situation the planet are actually facing for emergent diseases. This is a paper we are producing on the emergence of coronavirus species. We took all events of coronavirus in wild animals and also in humans or in our domestic animals in the world. And what we seeing about the appearance of the coronavirus species is that they respond positively and strongly to pollution, to human populations, or to index that are indicated changes caused by us in nature. For instance, deforestation, human developmental index, that is an index that reflects it's for having this understanding of what is a human development, we need to transform and change the environment to give us resources for having the level of existence this index is measuring. And this also is measuring the same, how much human are changing nature and a little bit of climate. But see, this is China with pollution and high population, a bit of Saudi Arabia. And then you have Europe and you have United States and Canada as a main axis of occurrence of coronavirus. So these virus are not appearing in the borders of a wild forest on those little men farming close to that place. They are appearing in centers of huge cities where natural resources are heavily consumed. We're just exploiting a forest in a place, taking those resources, mainly hunted animal, and taking those for places where consumerism is a driver. So the driver for new diseases ought to be much more related to developed places modified by humans than with wild pool places in the planet where biodiversity is. If you see in the spot of places where you have cases, Africa and the poorest corners of China and Bulgaria is one of the poorest corners of Europe, are places where cases are much less frequent than those in the developed world. And the problem is there a little bit what to have been done with SARS-CoV-2, my group. We're looking for the very much ecological starting, the early establishment of a pandemic. And if you look on that, what's really important is the amount of passengers going to that place. In other words, how much you are connected in this planet is going to be the cause for the disease to spread, which means that after it started, a pandemic cannot easily be identified in the origin because it's going to be spreading very fast. That's that distribution in the planet will respond to the amount of passengers or the connection you have with the rest of the world. The same work to Brazil, but with some more extra problems. This model we produced is going to show you how much of the disease is being produced for the first months and the sequence of the capitals being attacked by the virus because of the air transportation network we have in Brazil. That's the second in the planet, which is smaller than United States for air transportation. And you can see that Manaus is actually being hit very fast. In Manaus is a hub in the transportation for all the north of Brazil and South America. And then you have an extra problem with that. And it's the fact that Manaus is this. Manaus is a concentration of badly urbanized set of people with huge areas dominated by poverty, with like sanitary and poor conditions. Is a city very vulnerable in sanitary terms for any kind of disease. And that brings us to our second aspect on both emergence of disease and also the prevalence of those diseases already with us is the habitat condition. Eventually, we can call that a diseased ecosystem. So let's start this last part of the talk is what is a disease ecosystem and what is a diseased host pathogen interaction and how that could affect insect vectors of disease distribution. And let's have a look in a case and a board and let's explore two aspects, disturbance and facilitation first, and then global warming after. Disturbance is a condition of changing the environment for something else that can provide condition for us to live. But many times this is uncontrolled and produce more problems than solutions. And then we're going to have a look in the Atlantic rainforest in Minas Gerais state, southeastern Brazil. This is a fantastic forest in a lake forest system, very complex, dense, well-preserved forest, where originally the Lutzomia longipalpis is the vector of the visceral leishmaniasis used to habitat. This was the place where this species evolved and appeared in the planet, but no longer. This is a species that, just as before I showed you, are very much capable to adapt to all changes in the world and produce a much denser and well-succeeded population among us than in these places. So a forest like this is the place from where Lutzomia longipalpis came, but actually they may like much better a place like this today. And that forest is along the Doce River Valley. The Doce River Valley is a very important river for Minas Gerais state, which was totally destroyed by Samarco tailings dam collapse in 2015. This is the worst environmental disaster in 100 years and produced this tailing reaching heavy metal distribution along the whole river into the ocean. And that changed completely the valley, and that changed completely the interaction between the forest and the river, and caused a disturbance that can be understood as a diseased ecosystem. And a diseased ecosystem like this will produce that habitat without predators, without competitors, or any other component capable to regulate a vector species population, which is able to occupy these places. So if Lutzomia longipalpis or any other vector of disease are resistant enough to cope with heavy metals in places like this, in the litter of the vegetation, in the borders of rivers or locations contaminated like this, they can be increasing their population outside of the cities and towards the upper part of the valley. So when we say those rivers are highway to hell, where is this hell where this vector insect disease can reach? Is the high mountains on the Iron Quadrangle of Minas Gerais. This is a mountain ecosystem, high altitude, where we have predominance of heavy metals on the soil. Is a natural condition. But how is this affecting actually this vector species? We actually exploring this right now. We doing research on the metallothioneins. This is a little bit delayed because of the pandemic, but we trying to understand how this species can have this protein being induced by the environment contaminated and eventually being exapted, like pre-adapted to the conditions found in the mountains, where it can go actually if something else happened. And this something else is temperature, because most of these insect vectors of disease, they are constrained by lower temperatures. They need the temperatures to be lower, higher. And indeed, we are finding expansion of the leishmaniasis, visceral leishmaniasis in Minas Gerais from the beginning of the 21st century. For the next decade, the occurrence of this disease is spreading in places with more higher altitude and also in the valley of the Doce River. And we're trying to understand what is the driver behind this pattern of expansion of this disease that bring us then finally to global warming and landscape long-term change. If you change the environment where our species are living, are we providing then a precondition for further expansions in a scenario of a hotter and eventually wetter climate? So this is the expansion of Aedes aegypti and dengue in the planet. You see in Africa where they still living in wild vegetation. This is a species from the forest, and in Africa they still are there. These are not changing. For the pink, which is Africa, you see it's not changing with time. But in the Americas and Asia, where this species is invaded, the number of cases of the disease is also expanding together. If you put this in the context of mountains in the tropics, a mountain ecosystem is challenged by global warming more than any other places in the planet. This is a place in 2006 in Ouro Preto City, where is my university, with a dieback of 3 species by a too dry and hot winter and fires in the back, changing the vegetation. And then let's have a look in the temperatures from 60s to now in Minas Gerais state. So this is a data on the temperature for Minas Gerais state. And see that compared to Ouro Preto, which is inside Minas Gerais state, but it's a high altitude city within the state. If you see the temperatures, if you down here the winter temperatures, you see that in the 80s, when Aedes aegypti invaded Brazil again, it was exterminated in the early 20th century and came back in the 80s, mostly in southeastern Brazil, in the cities of southeastern Brazil. And if you look in the temperatures, that happened in a moment where the winter temperatures start to be happening above the average of the previous 2 decades, both winter and summer temperatures, but then winter seems to be the key. And when you have in 2002 a very hot winter, and after that a maintenance above the average of those winter temperatures, then we had Aedes aegypti invasion on Ouro Preto, high altitude city. Probably this mosquito invaded in 2007, according to this paper of us, and in 2012 we had dengue as an autochthonous disease in the city that never had it before. So global warming eventually is causing the conditions for this disease to invade a city that never have seen this disease before. But if you come back to Belo Horizonte, where dengue is there for the 80s, for the beginning, for the 90s, for the beginning of the disease invasion in Brazil, even in Belo Horizonte, a lower city, you're gonna find that the number of cases of dengue is going to be directly reactive to temperature. The higher the temperature of that year, the higher the number of cases. But pay attention, that's in the dry season. So what it's showing you is the maximum temperature in the winter for Belo Horizonte city. And that is a cause of a huge part of the variance in number of cases along quite a long time series. So let's have a look in the time series. This 96, 2017. And the highest temperatures in blue that are related with the highest number of cases produced, in fact, the epidemic years. This is where one understood we have dengue in Belo Horizonte, outbreaks alternated between years. And now we found, this is a paper we're finishing now, that the temperature is a main driver of those epidemic years, regardless everything else you produce and does. This is dengue. When it happens in outbreaks, the number of cases are huge. You cannot prevent that or stop that in any way. But weather changing conditions are also facilitating for other diseases like visceral leishmaniasis in Belo Horizonte. This is the number of cases responding now to increasing in precipitation, in rainfall. But that's another case, is a little bit different because leishmaniasis has happened in much lower number of cases. Therefore, they are more susceptible for human intervention, positive public health actions to reduce the disease. Still, the peak outbreaks of leishmaniasis were happened in those years with the rainfall being happened above the average of the time series. So when you have extraordinary rainfall in a year, you may have more problems with leishmaniasis. And if you come back then, and this again is a change likely to affect everything. So if you look in the leishmaniasis in an even lower place, like 200 meters above sea level, which is Governador Valadares, a very endemic and affected city for leishmaniasis. You see the number of cases just jumping after 2007. Remember for dengue in Ouro Preto, that was a key moment when you have a time lag after a very hot winter 2002, and a sequence of hot years that produced conditions for those insects to invade new places or to have their population increased excessively in places where they existed before. So you see, after 2007, the number of cases of leishmaniasis in Valadares just went to more than double than it was before. So that's a specific change in temperature affecting the beginning of a decade caused or larger population of those insect vectors and an increase in the disease they transmit to us where they already existed, as well as an increase in geographic distribution of those diseases by the spreading of those insects to these other places like Ouro Preto and other mountain ecosystems in Minas Gerais state. My conclusion finally is that invasive, resistant, generalist, but terrible competitor species, incapable to deal with high diversity of other species, are those that are ruling the world of diseases. Is our coexistence with those species that can take space with us, that can take advantage of the environment we disturbed, we changed, we polluted, are those that are causing us, as well as new emergent disease that can affect humanity badly, like SARS-CoV-2, or old diseases that may become a worse sanitarian problem, health problem, than they are today for us. My final statement is that we have to break down disciplinary barriers. We have to look at health and ecology together. We have to look towards biodiversity and pathogens in an integrated way to face the challenge of health, public health in this changing world, in a warmer planet. Thank you very much. These are the agencies that helped me in this paper, in these projects, in my contact. Thank you indeed.